So hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session. I'd love to invite all of you to come join us a little bit at the front. It's going to be a nice, cozy session. Today this session is about planet, people, and power. And what a just transition really means across generations. What we mean by just transition is transitioning away from health-harming fossil fuels towards cleaner and cheaper energy and nature-based solutions that would provide and drive a healthy and a safe future for many generations to come. And the science is quite clear. Right after COVID, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC report that countries use in the climate negotiations, it demonstrated how the impacts of climate change, children who are born in 2020 are going to live a hotter world, are going to experience up to 4 times the rate of climate disasters that their grandparents have seen and lived in the 1960s, like Andy shared in the plenary. But then in the same year, UNICEF also demonstrated that climate disasters have affected every year and disrupted the education of 40 million children, not only by destroying the schools because of climate disasters, but displacing families and causing illnesses that keep children out of their classroom. And a recent report by the Global Climate and Health Alliance showed that air pollution, fossil fuels, the toxic chemicals that not only impact children, both neurologically, mentally, and physically, but they also stay for decades. So they affect children who are unborn yet. This data does not only show an abstract set of projections or statistics, it shows the lived realities of millions of children and young people. It also shows us who should be held accountable for these consequences. And our current political and economic systems are failing our younger and future generations by persistently prioritizing shorter political gains and electoral cycles, by choosing not to further delay a transition away from fossil fuels, and instead actually subsidizing fossil fuels in trillions. According to the last IMF report, 7 trillion every year for fossil fuel, which can instead be used strategically for healthcare and education. It's a very easy thing to do, but countries don't do it. And then finally, really passing on a planet and a life that doesn't sustain the health and dignity of future generations. So we're going this session to talk about a very important principle. It's underpinning what we're doing today. It's about intergenerational justice. And this is an ethical and a moral and a legal framework that discusses not only equity, but looks into the responsibility, the accountability, and the rights across all generations. A positive statistic is that now 40%, more than 40% of constitutions globally recognize future generations, which really strengthens the moral obligation of governments to respond to the needs and consider the needs of future generations and act in their behalf. And it asks very important questions that we're here to ask in our session. Who is causing the harm and who bears the most costs, and what can governments, financial institutions, healthcare professionals, and academics do to promote and protect human health, planetary health for those who are here now and those who are yet to be born. So we are so fortunate to do this with an amazing experts who are at the front line of these challenges. And I would like to first invite Professor Raya, who was there in the plenary, and we're going to get a deep dive into all the really important insights she had linking demography, environment, and sustainable development with a specific focus on vulnerability and adaptive capacity. So you can join us now, Professor Raya. Thank you.
Okay, so this just gives me a bit of opportunity to elaborate slightly more from what I was saying in the plenary. So it's going to be slightly representative, but at least I can show you some of the maps and graph some of the visualization here. So yeah, you see my slides. So I already did say that we do have some evidence that climate change may have may already be affecting fertility, mortality, and migration. So what I try to do is, so this is like 4 or 5 years of the project funded by the European Commission. So I've been working on this topic for a while, and then I want to synthesize the evidence and then share with you today. But maybe starting slightly from the headline news, that it has become relevant. Like we have lived through it. Actually, climate change is already affecting all world regions. So if you think about North America, Europe, the Arctic as well, everywhere. And in Asia, we've seen floods, mortality from floods, from heat wave. So not only the health part, but we also see that sometimes the media is also trying to link the mass migration event, like back in 2018 and again 2021, we have seen a massive movement of people from Central America, like from Haiti, Honduras, and trying to walk and then across the border of Mexico and trying to get into the US. And some media said this is because the Central America has been experiencing consecutive droughts for many years, and maybe that could be a driver. So that's no scientific stamp yet, but at least that's kind of alerting what the public has thought. And then also another thing that it's quite new actually for demographers to work on it or think about it. Climate change may also affect fertility intention and also behavior and even the fertility rate as well. So I'm trying to tell you everything in maybe 11 minutes. Okay. So as I kind of say that, so if these extreme climate events, be it rapid onset or slow onset, so we can think about floods and storms, wildfires as something that happens suddenly. Slow one would be things like drought, desertification, sea level rise, for instance. So if they do have some impact on these three demographic components, fertility, mortality, and migration. So this means that when we think about the future population trends, we cannot think about, we cannot make the same type of assumption that we have made, because up until now, we never thought that climate can affect fertility, because fertility would be affected by female education and family policies and so on. The same thing goes for mortality and migration. So it's kind of like putting on the table that if climate do affect these three demographic components, when we think about how future population would develop in terms of population size, composition, distribution, then maybe climate is one of the factors. Actually, I have to say that it's not only climate, because everything is interacting. So I start looking at conflict as well, under the interaction between climate and conflict. Maybe I saw some prominent demographers over there, but maybe those who may be not familiar with demography, so just try to say that. And I have to look at the three components, because if we want to understand how population would look like, so we know the population of the current time period, we want to know how the population would develop into the next time period. So we have to know how many people were born, how many people survive, how many people move in, and how people move out. And how many children that women would bear. So that's why if climate affects some of the components, then we have to really look at the three things and not just one dimension. So I would start from some evidence on migration. I move to mortality and really quickly on fertility. Climate impact on migration, I already mentioned in the plenary that one of the big questions that we often got asked, particularly in Europe, is, are they coming to Europe? Because that's what policymakers, at least they need to plan, or at least they need to think of what kind of development policy would have to be if migrants or a large number of migrants would be coming to Europe. So actually, this is a topic that is most studied as compared to other things. So migration, I think it has exploded in the last 15 years. So I could count around maybe 1,500 empirical studies that look at how climatic variables or environmental change may be linked with migration movement. So what we try to do is to synthesize and summarize this evidence, right? Because it's mixed, actually. Some literature do report that maybe exposing to drought actually suppress migration. Sometimes it increase migration and sometimes no relationship. So I had the kind of this ambitious aim because I want this unified kind of conclusion to communicate, right? So what is it? What does climate change do to migration? Of course, we have to admit the heterogeneity, but now it's been 10 years-ish that I work on this topic. So what we did is we did a systematic literature review. So we borrow from the health or medical literature, actually, this method. So we try to synthesize the literature and also perform the meta-analysis because we really would like to quantify what is the size of the effect here. So now I can say with confidence, 10 years ago, no, but now I could say that if climate would drive migration at all, it is going to be short distance, mainly within the country or maybe just across the border. So we don't really see, actually, based on the data and literature that have been published up until now, we don't really see that if people maybe imagine somewhere in Africa get exposed to drought, and we would see those people, like a large number of them coming to places like Europe or North America. So there's no evidence on that. And those who migrate, actually, we kind of think that, maybe it's the poorest one. Actually, we don't have that evidence. The literature also don't show that. So it's not the poorest. And I think the explanation is they may not have enough resources to mobilize their movement. And not the richest either, because the richest one, they're probably not rely on agriculture, or they can adapt. So we see this middle income countries, middle income type of household would be the one most likely to move. Another thing that I could say is tend to be agriculture dependent areas. I think that's straightforward, not a surprising thing, people living in rural areas. And another thing is conflict mediates this relationship. So conflict plays a role. So I want to dive slightly further into this. This is kind of new because I think mostly the scholars tend to be split, right? Those who like to work on climate change, and we have tons of political scientists that interested in topic like war and conflict. But as we see from the world that we are living right now, the climate crisis we hear about us every day, and new wars or the persistent wars that we have been living in. So it's sort of, one could also say that it is the poly crisis that we are experiencing. So I started with climate change, but I thought I don't reflect reality if I don't look at the potential compounding risks that people are facing. So what we did is, again, I am interested to look at migration, but here, first I just put some maps. It's the countries that we have the data on. So it's 144, actually not 150 countries. So we want to see the area. So this is the subnational regions of different countries, and to see that which area are exposed to both conflict and also drought, right? So if we see the color, so the kind of the redder the color, that would be the country has been experiencing drought for many years, or consecutive drought over the period 2010 to 2019. The blue-ish color would represent conflict, and you see the kind of the purple-ish color. The purple one would be a bit more experiencing both drought and conflict in a high intensity. And you can see from this map, you can locate some of the purple colors, so sort of in the strip of some countries in the Sahel, or not as surprisingly, countries in the Middle East, right? So we have Iraq, for instance, or Afghanistan that get exposed to both of these multiple risks. So what we do, we have the data on the intention to migrate. So I just go quickly here. I mentioned a bit in the plenary as well. So in the baseline, so let's say that people don't experience much, no drought, no conflict. So the zero part here, generally some people express anyway that they want to migrate, about 22%. Now if I move slightly, increase the conflict, but no drought, so stay around the zero drought. It increased a bit of the probability of people who want to migrate, maybe about 26%, 25% of people say that. But when we increase this intensity, right, so we have 12 months of exposure to drought, and then like that same level of conflict. Now I have 45% of people. So it's amplifying. So these two risk interacting, and I think it's important to consider here. I'm gonna probably skip that because I did mention that we can also capture who are the people who are more likely to say that they want to move based on their age, their sex, their gender, within the rural urban area. So we find a bit higher for female people in rural areas. So we can discuss if you're interested here. Moving on to mortality. Okay, I have a question for you. Which one do you think causes more deaths on average, extreme cold or extreme heat? Average, I mean the global average. So annually, it is estimated that roughly extreme temperature-related mortality attribute to about 5 million deaths per year. But I want to ask you basically, who think that people die more from cold than heat? Please raise your hand globally. This is a global. So meaning the rest think that people die more from heat? Cold. Heat. Yeah. So actually, up until now, yeah, that's what I thought as well. But in fact, it's more cold, because if you think, it doesn't mean that it hits the -5, then people die. But also, if you think about cold countries, so we also get sick from having influenza, for instance. That also can be the cause of mortality too, right? So heat tend to have more of a short-term effect. So if it's heat day, the vulnerable populations, like the older person or people with comorbidity, they can get heat stroke. It can affect cardiovascular disease. So it kind of, when I talk about mortality, I may sound indifferent. It may cue straight away. So heat. But anyway, so it's been the cold part. So this is the data for Europe, quite recent. It's in the last 6-7 years. So we, as you can see, so if we line up the temperature, the colder one, we see slightly higher mortality than the hot one. Now, moving forward into the future, as I was saying, that we heard from Andrew talk as well that actually temperature, unfortunately, we're not doing much. If we go on with the current policy, so the scenarios, it's typically called a SSP2, the emission scenario is 4.5, but think of it as SSP2 as a business as usual scenarios. By the end of the century, this is the most likely thing that's going to happen. It may sound pessimistic, but just to say how things are evolving, we're probably going to reach about 2.5, 2.7 degree by the end of the century, business as usual. What's going to happen to mortality in European countries? If you see the green color, it's mean that this area or region would experience the reduction in mortality. The yellow and the red one would be the increase in mortality. And what we can see, I kind of saying already, the Nordic part, so the cold part, actually would benefit from that, because you remember that we say that people die more from cold-related mortality. Reduction in cold days would mean that they experience a reduced, but the sort of the southern part of Europe, what we would see would be increased because of it's getting warmer. If I move into more pessimistic scenarios, like 5 degrees of warming, now it's becoming even more red, but actually the Nordic country still benefit from it. Summing everything up, no? So this is a heterogeneity between subnational regions. If I sum all the regions that we see for European regions, what we would see, so by the middle of the century, this benefit that we see, so maybe you can focus on SSP2, the blue one, we saw the reduction in mortality because as we see that correlated mortality goes up, but at some point, since the temperature keep on rising, at the end of the day, this benefit that we see is not going to be there anymore. So in the future, excess mortality, we're going to experience that it come from heat. The more extreme scenario, like SSP5, 5 degree world, it would be increased even more. So just kind of a note that we probably have to deal, the health system would have to deal with this pressure as well. This is the last one. I have 2 slides on this, on fertility. One could think about how climate may affect fertility in 2-3 ways. It can be really physiological, so heat. There's evidence for mammals, actually for animals, that heat can suppress the reproductive function. Or it could also be psychological adaptation, right? You may have heard, the younger people may say that I don't want to have children because I don't want my child to be born in this world under the climate crisis, or I'm worried about my carbon footprint. We have a bit of evidence on that, on the fertility intention, but what I want to show you, just a quick thing, my last slide here, is we don't know why, but this is the most consistent evidence. This is a work of the past 4 or 5 years that I've been doing. We found exactly the same effect for Italy, Mexico, and another 65 low and middle income countries. So in Italy, I look at the province level, in Mexico, municipality level, the other 65 countries, the community level. So what we find is that the areas that get exposed to some kind of extreme heat, in Italy is actually one day over 25 degrees. 9 months later, we see a slight drop in fertility, and then it gets picked up. It doesn't change afterwards, after the 10 month, 11 month. Same for France, same for the US, same for Spain, and then Mexico, and then other countries. We don't know yet why this happened. It can be physiological, behavioral, but it does contribute slightly to this short-term fertility reduction. I'm stopping here. You see the negative effects on fertility. Mortality is probably likely to increase under more warming at the end of the day, and migration, as I said, we may see some of the internal displacement. And that's it, I think. I stop here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not too bad on time.
Thank you so much, Raya. Yes, please. And I'd like to invite the rest of the panelists to come join us on the stage. But this has been so insightful. And I really love the point also how you demonstrated, we cannot just talk about climate without conflict and the different vulnerabilities. And I think we'll get into that as well to understand your experience from how populations are disproportionately affected by these multiple crises. So thank you again. So before we start the panel, also, if you have any questions for Raya, please have them prepared, because we'll have a round of Q&As and we'd like to hear from you as well. But before we get into it, we have another incredible expert, Yukiko Yamada-Morovic. She is the Director of Environmental Sustainability and Climate Action at World Vision International Spain. And I would love to hear from you if you can tell us about your work, particularly on the impacts of climate on children, and how it's shaping policy and practice in the field, especially in the climate negotiation space.
Thank you so much. I wonder whether my slides can be shown. Excellent, fantastic. No, this is the result of the consultation that we've done. So I work for World Vision International, and I work a lot with children. The World Vision is a Christian humanitarian and development organization working in 100 countries. And we conducted this child consultation survey about their perspectives of how climate change is impacting. And I was fascinated by Raya's presentation, how academically there's evidence. So children said there's food insecurity issues and also malnutrition issues. Education disruption, as Omnia mentioned, because school days get blocked when there's a heat wave or flooding. Thank you so much. And child protection issues, because parents get stressed during the climate crisis, and the negative coping strategy affects on children. There's an evidence that child marriage gets increased during the climate emergencies, and displacement. In this case, we asked children in the Pacific Islands. So there was quite a bit of a distance migration as well. And increasingly mental health issues, the so-called climate anxieties related to the fear of future, and also fear of losing their cultural heritage and identity, especially from, for example, the indigenous communities in the Amazon rainforest felt like, for example, a girl told me she no longer knows all the variety of fish that her father was talking about. From World Vision, we analyzed 100 countries' principal national climate policies, so-called nationally determined contributions. That's the mandatory tool to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and national adaptation plans. Now, interestingly or shockingly, 95% of these climate policies do mention or consider hunger as an issue in the context of changing climate. However, only 18% of them referring to child hunger. And of course, malnutrition, nutrition supplements and all the micronutrient issues are growing in the context of climate change, but only 11% of them, 11% of them are coming from more developed countries. So least developed countries and developing countries, they have issues. There's a QR code for this Hungry Futures Index. If anyone would like to check the actual evidence, please do. Go ahead. So that was the shocking result. And only 2.4% of the climate finance is actually dedicated to projects which are considered to be child responsive or sensitive. So that's a shocking result, given that children and young people are the key stakeholders of the future of our planet. So moving on, we do have some hope, because I don't want to sort of end the presentation as a doomsday. But in the latest COP30, finally, adaptation is no longer sort of inferior brother or sister to the mitigation effort, right? Despite the fact that SDG 13 does say that 50% of climate action finance has to go to adaptation. So there was a big adaptation move in terms of the actual funding. But what we would like to welcome, obviously there was a bit of polemic around the global goals on adaptation, how they were adopted. It was not very transparent. But I was surprised that 10 indicators on health did stay in the climate global goal on adaptation indicators. And out of those indicators, one of them was on mental health. And I was very well impressed, because that was the topic that advocacy organizations were pushing, because it's been very difficult to demonstrate. Well, there has been lots of sort of, from our side as an NGO, we have lots of evidence or anecdotal level or consultation that children were showcasing the anxiety, increasing mental health issues in the changing climate. But finally, at the policy level, is catching up, that there will be an effort to measure and track on the mental health issues in changing climate. So I would like to finish my presentation. I had the privilege of joining the COPs over the last 5-6 years, always together with children from either least developed countries or developing nations. And this is Shania from Tanzania. She's part of the local children's club for climate governance led by children. And she asked, this was an Egyptian presidency hosting at COP 2020. She asked, why is it so difficult for adults and policymakers to involve children in climate action? Because we children are the real agents of change, because we children care about climate change, and they can inform their children, parents and communities, and change their behaviors. So this was a very simple question to which many policymakers didn't know how to answer. There was a moment of silence in the room. So I would like everyone in this hall to think and reflect, when we say that they are the future stakeholder of the planet, what's the best way to engage? At least, shall we ask them what they feel? What do they perceive? So this would be my sort of challenge to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yukiko. And, I completely agree in terms of not only including children's voices and considering their needs, but also how can they meaningfully participate in decision-making processes that define their future. And this is a great segue to learn from Karina Hirsch. She is the head of advocacy and policy at the Margaret Pike Trust in the UK. And she's going to share a bit about her incredible work with women and girls and really the lived realities that they are experiencing because of climate change and its impact on their health.
Thank you so much, Omnia. And I'm really grateful for this session that is really looking at the unseen people and the unheard voices of climate change and really giving a picture to what climate looks like from children to women and girls. So as Omnia said, my name is Karina Hirsch. I work for the Margaret Pike Trust. Now, Margaret Pike was a family planning or pioneer for sexual and reproductive health and rights in the UK in the 1920s and 30s. So the organization was set up in 1969 in her honor and in her memory, and was focused and dedicated to training doctors and nurses in sexual and reproductive health updates in the UK around that time. But at the turn of the last century, the focus of the organization really shifted, looking at the places in the world where the highest levels of unmet need for voluntary and rights-based family planning and broader sexual and reproductive health information and services, where those health needs were directly colliding with things like biodiversity hotspots and the advancing effects of climate change. And what you'll often find is that these areas very much overlap. And they are what we call in the health sector, at least in my work, last mile communities. They are the hardest to reach places. And they are really where it's interesting because we're talking about health systems here, but often what a health system looks like in last mile or remote rural communities is very different to what we to what we imagine. It is just a health outpost. It's just a shack, if you're lucky, with some medicines in it that should actually be elevated a little bit off the ground so that they don't get washed away when there are floods. And we know that most recently, those health outposts, those very outreach services or very rudimentary systems have been, in many places in least developed countries across sub-Saharan Africa, have been completely dismantled because of USAID and because of USAID cuts and aid cuts from other countries as well. So, but I want to focus on a positive message and a positive solution, because here we're talking about people, planet, and power. And what we as an organization are co-designing with communities and what we are advocating for in biodiversity and in health policy spaces are community-led, community-designed, rigorously monitored and evaluated solutions that are addressing the health, gender, and livelihood challenges experienced by these communities. Because what a very dear colleague of mine from Ethiopia once said, people don't have a health challenge today and a livelihood challenge tomorrow and a climate challenge next year. No, people don't live their lives in silos. So that has been a real negative aspect of development aid thus far. And so this approach, which has often been called the Population Health, Environment and Development, or PHED approach, is really looking at these integrated challenges and proposing integrated solutions. And then we use the results that are generated from our projects to advocate for financing mechanisms that make more of this type of work eligible. So my organization currently has a program in Southwest Uganda in the Ruchiga district called the Healthy Wetlands for the Cranes and People of Ruchiga. The gray crowned crane is the national bird of Uganda, so it does help to have a flagship species. But conservation organization, the International Crane Foundation, had been working in Ruchiga district for over 30 years, trying to preserve the gray crowned crane, trying to protect the wetlands of Ruchiga. But we're not making that much progress, at least not sustainable progress. So with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine as our academic partner, they came to us and they said, you know about health, you know about gender. The International Crane Foundation have been working there for ages, and they've been talking to the communities and asking them, what challenges are you facing? And a woman like Christine, who you see in the picture, said, well, you know what? The nearest clinic is a 4-hour walk away. If you are a subsistence farmer, changing rainfall patterns, soil erosion, landslides, drought, you are already in a very precarious situation. And let me tell you, this is the reality for hundreds and millions of smallholder farmers and of rural people around the world. If you are already facing that, you cannot afford the transport, and you cannot afford to take a day off work and have someone look after your children while you go get healthcare. So you don't get healthcare. Not just reproductive healthcare, but all healthcare. But in terms of reproductive health, what does this mean? Again, the community members were asked, what challenges are you facing? And the women said, we are having 8 children, not because we would like, that's not our choice. And this type of programming is about choice. It's about gender justice, environmental justice, and climate justice. These are 3 sides of the same coin. So we quickly understood that we needed to act across all these sectors. So we came together as a consortium of organizations from the health sector, from the environmental sector, and very importantly, from academia, because this needs a very rigorous design process and M&E so that we can say, when you program like this, when you respond to a holistic set of challenges in an equally holistic and rights-based way from a community lens, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, but we are seeing it equals 3, it equals 4, it equals 5. And then we take that and we advocate in the International Union for Conservation of Nature and in the climate change COPs. Because we are seeing countries like Uganda, they're saying, unless you act on health, unless you integrate our reproductive health concerns in our priority adaptation targets, the funding has fallen away. So one of the things we need to do is look for new allies and new sources of funding. So in the case of Uganda, they do reference reproductive health programs under their priority adaptation targets in their NDC. And by the way, this isn't about mitigation. This is about resilience and adaptive capacity at the individual and at the community level, because Uganda contributes, guess how much to global emissions? 0.2%. So it's certainly not on Uganda to really be focusing on mitigating. That's up to high consumption countries. So the point is we need to at least be building adaptive capacity. And we are here to talk about practical solutions. So I wanted to offer at least one way that we can be working across sectors, leveraging innovative forms of finance and addressing real health, livelihood, and gender concerns. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Karina. Thank you. And it's really, I found it very insightful to see how you're able to work with different sectors. As you said, normally the health sector, it's quite challenging to be engaging with the climate and the environment sector and to actually co-develop solutions. But then you did that in a way that is community-led and community-centered. And would love to explore that later on. But now I would love to introduce, and I practiced your name, but please excuse me if I don't get it right. Warafot Kinkankau.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, Sawadee krab. Hi, everyone. My name is Warapot King Keo Kantong. It's a mouthful, but you can call me Ping from here, Bangkok, Thailand. So I work under a bank here called Kasikorn Bank. And at our bank, we take people and climate very seriously because we think that the bank's role is to support communities, right? And without communities, the bank wouldn't survive. So you see our bank engage in various rainforest saving projects, community engagement, driving brown sectors to a more greener ones. And the business unit that I'm representing is called Beacon Venture Capital. So what we do is that we invest money to innovators who want to create essentially a better world or better society. And we do that because we believe that, you know, in the old days, we think, oh, finance guys are the bad guys, you know, they ruins the community, they ruins the environment. But we are here to prove that creating good social and environmental return can happen at the same time as, you know, monetary return. And that is marrying the two sides is the only way that the impact would last in a very long time. You can't have one side or the other. So what we do is that we make investment in different spaces from fintech, where we look at financial inclusion for minorities, for women, for youth. We invest in solution that helps industry transition from brown industry to cleaner energy sources or save on energy that they are using every day while they don't have the luxury to sort of transition from fossil fuel based to a renewable energy. And we also make an investment in the data side to help regulator make better regulatory oversight in businesses so that they can protect consumers better or ensure that the businesses are doing their business in a way that is responsible for the stakeholder as much as possible. So that's what we do.
Yeah, and can you tell us as well examples of any of the products for engaged communities or did that transition from brown to green industries?
Definitely. One example that of the investment that we make is in a company that is based in the UK. So we know that along the supply chain, right, carbon footprint happens everywhere. And what happens in the past is that the big guys, the top of the chain, would force small business owners to comply to the standard that they are being complied right now, whether it's Europe standard or what have you. And this company helps the small businesses along the supply chain to also transition to save energy. So thereby, at the top of the supply chain, the total carbon emission is reduced. And that company gives the recommendation on how those businesses can save money from doing so as well. So it turns the narrative from, you have to do that for my sake, to you doing that and you benefit from it as well. And that is the example of sustainable transition. One of the other example that we make an investment in is within the financial inclusion space. This is in the UK as well. So we invest in this company called Algebra, and what they essentially do is they provide neobanks to underserved Muslim communities in the UK. And you may ask, why is that an exciting idea, right? If you look back at the way that Islamic population believes that they are following this rule called the Sharia rule, where they can invest to get interest. So that means that they don't have the option to save their money, grow their wealth in traditional banks in the UK. You may say, oh, there are a lot of Islamic banks in the UK, but in reality, those banks are designed to serve high net worth individuals only. So this population are faced with the choice of whether they have to, forego their religions, their beliefs, or they have to, not try to grow their wealth, keep money under the pillow and hope for the best, right? So this company comes in and offers this solution, and we see an instant uplift in the community that they are touching. The people have the choice to save money, grow their wealth, and thereby creating that safety net for themselves and the next generation. So that are some examples that we do.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is so very inspiring to see. And as you said, both you and Karina mentioned the importance of building the resilience of the communities to be able to then adapt to the impacts of climate or conflict, as Raya was showing us. And I'm going to come back to you, Raya. And one question I had is around, as an academic, and you have all these incredible research that you've done and you've showed us, how has your experience been translating the research into policy, into influencing the policy design by governments, or even the challenges that you would see that, or your experience on that science to policy translation?
Maybe I have to admit that this is a part that I feel less competent, and but I think this is a good opportunity also to have the dialogues with practitioners, so at least I could learn what I find or say, is it useful or not. But this is two thinking that I have from our, let's say, from the research that because it's kind of from what I find, but I don't know if it's practical to say these implications. Like so, the first thing is about this differential impact, so the heterogeneity. I give one example because Yukiko also talked about the children, and you also mentioned about women. So I have done some work also on the exposure to drought or floods and the effect on child malnutrition. But what we can do is we can also dig further. So who get more affected? So we have evidence for countries like India, Ethiopia, and so on, Uganda as well. So we find that it's not, because my thinking is like this: if the government or household don't have much resource, so the communities might want to target the truly vulnerable ones. So for instance, we find that when we talk about children, we know children aged under 5 are more sensitive when there's an issue of food insecurity. But amongst the under 5, maybe really the less than 1 would be the most vulnerable. So maybe that's a group that needs to be targeted. Then we look at the difference between boys and girls, and I think that's quite interesting and worrying, maybe, because typically boys physiologically would be more likely to be more sensitive to malnutrition to undernutrition than girls. In India, this is the interesting case because in India, what we found is girls are catching up with boys to be malnourished when household experience food insecurity. So meaning we thought that it's probably there's a kind of differential practice in terms of feeding boys. So I thought, okay, this type of thing of fighting maybe kind of trying to say that, okay, if you want to intervene, that's a kind of the target group. So that's my first point. The second one is I think it's about short and long-term type of planning or intervention. I think politicians tend to have probably shorter sighted, but things that we do like demography is slow. It takes time to change that, as we see from one of the plenary. Like if you, for instance, if the interest is on reduced fertility, the fertility reduction today wouldn't affect the population size, right? Because it takes time. There's a momentum. So the short term, if it think about focus on climate or conflict impact. So it's probably preparing infrastructure, the system. I talk about heat, so the health system. So I think what the academy can do is to improve the prediction. It should be a bit more real time. So if you see that there's a temperature change, now we start seeing it's going to be raining and so on. So we can probably give more of the real-time type of prediction, what would be the impact. So I think it's an improvement from our side too, like maybe the apps that is more user-friendly, that kind of thing. That's one thing. The long-term ones, as we're saying, and it come out quite clear from our work actually that one thing is investing in universal education, both for boys and girls. Actually, only secondary level of education, it would reduce vulnerability, improve gender equality, female empowerment, increase jobs, and so on. Adaptive capacity, everything. And that's a slightly long term. If you invest now, you don't see the results today. So I think I stop here. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And some of my work as well, many countries would really look for, as you said, the real-time data and especially in healthcare facilities to have early warning systems to anticipate these different shifts. So thank you for that. Yukiko, you mentioned, the national and climate plans submitted by countries and children are not mentioned sufficiently enough. But also there is an increased focus on adaptation. So what do you think is the solution to do that, to get countries more active, to consider the needs of children, both their physical and their mental health? What can we do, in your opinion?
That's a super difficult question, because in the end, there's no sort of single magic solution that would fit for children in the Amazon rainforest community, to the children in the dry corridor of Central America, to the Pacific Islands. So we have anecdotal cases of fragmented projects that had a success cases, and that's been always locally led, community-based, when the community really owns it and lift it to the local governors. That's when we saw the success. Like it wasn't a top-down approach, but bottom-up and involving the local policymakers. we have a program called Citizen Voice and Action, and we sort of customize for children and youth, and also parents and caregivers for especially children below the age of 5. We also learned, I come from more climate sector, and listening, it's been an incredible learning journey for me over the past few days, because you can still see the sort of siloed approach despite the effort to bring us together. And I saw the same when I'm in the field level communities, that Minister of Environment or Climate Change doesn't always talk to the Minister of Health. And also the election cycles that I'm really grateful that you mentioned, because our national focal points, for example, for climate finance, they are political positions. And very often newly appointed person may not know the trajectory of the country. So we feel like we have to start from scratch again. So when there's a community ownership that's not always affected by the election changes or siloed approach of different government ministers, that's when we see the real change. And we have a very simple community-led approach, especially for those who can't read and write. So we have a scorecard with smiley faces and explain to the communities what kind of basic rights they should have. Social protection, because very often those who are far-flung areas, they are not familiar with their safety nets. Bangladesh, for example, as a government structure, they have a fantastic safety nets, but very often the families in the rural areas or urban slum areas, they are not familiar. They don't even know how to access. So we explain, for example, waste management, that's a local law. So children put smiley faces, like, is there garbage issue? Smiley or angry faces? And we compile those issues to the local governors. And they realize, no, we do actually have a law on this and that and the other. And that's where we try to support the conversation and engagement of the local stakeholders and local government and practitioners together. So that's been...
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that takes me to the question I had for Karina, because, you know, as you mentioned, you work with many communities on community-centered approaches and design. And one of the challenges we're facing now is the declining of development aid affecting communities the most. So would love to hear from you, you know, what is that impact that you've seen in your own work, but also how can we start to think about filling in this gap?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and one I'm very, very keen to talk about. So just going back to the issue that I was speaking about, the women and girls in low and middle income countries who lack access to sexual and reproductive health care, that is about, before USAID cuts, was about 257 million women and girls across the world, of which around 218 million are based in low and middle income countries. So since the USAID cuts, that number will have actually, gone up quite considerably, again, especially in the areas that I was speaking about, like Uganda, who relied heavily on USAID for its not just contraceptive supplies, but all medical supplies. I spoke to the head of the Uganda National Medical Store at some point last year, and he said, you know, we've got a container that has arrived that has tuberculosis medication, HIV antiretrovirals, contraceptive supplies. It's about a 6-month supply worth of medical supplies. One, we don't know when the next one is coming, and it's probably not coming, as we know from that source. And two, given the stop work orders that came into effect from one day to the next, there is also a whole distribution network and healthcare workers that were completely cut off. So the scale of the problem is growing. So what do we do? The example I gave of the program that we are implementing in Uganda is very interesting because it is around livelihood interventions, climate smart agriculture, and health. I've often been asked, so is it funded by FCDO, for example? No, it's funded by the UK's Department for the Environment, because through the 6 months of ethnographic research that was done at the outset, before the project even started, the case was made that unless healthcare service provision was in place, reopening about 20 clinics in the area that were previously not functioning, there was no way the conservation partners were going to achieve the ecological and the environmental benefits that they were hoping for unless they were also delivering healthcare. So DEFRA said, all right, that makes perfect sense. Let's do that. So to answer the question around what we do around finance, we have to be a lot smarter. That doesn't mean doing more with less, because as some of my development health colleagues say, it's like cutting off a horse's legs and asking it to run faster. So you can't do more with less, but we can work differently and work smarter. So looking to new places like these biodiversity pots. And also, I like what you say, Ray, about is that sort of generation of evidence useful? Absolutely. Because as we look at philanthropy, as we look at blended finance, of course, the evidence, we need more evidence. For example, in the case of sexual and reproductive health, we know that an investment of $1 will make a savings up to $28 in other social and health expenditure. That's huge. We know this is a development best buy. The return on investment, of course, is over a life course. It's not immediate. That is an important piece of evidence. We know also we need stories, individual stories, like the story of Christine, who is now running her own farm. She earns an income. She has better health care, so she's more resilient to climate change. She's got a much better standing in her family. She's able to access a revolving fund that now exists, where women are not only able to harvest the potatoes, but they're also able to package them, process them into chips, and therefore moving up in the value chain. So this is an individual story that is so important as we look for new finance. Climate finance is another one. In the last two IPCC reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that Omnia told us about, that are so fundamental in driving climate decisions, reproductive health as a pathway to climate resilient development, to individual and community resilience, as a gender transformative action has been recognized. That has failed to turn into larger scale action. Most countries, I think 90 countries say we need gender sensitive action is important for us, yet only a very tiny percentage of climate finance, I believe it's 2%, goes to gender focused targets. So maybe we need to do a better job of working with academia to help us have that evidence to approach these new funders that we inevitably have to go to. We have to get health into national adaptation plans, internationally determined contributions beyond Uganda and a few other countries. Because whilst having something in a nationally determined contribution or in a national adaptation plan isn't sufficient, it is a necessary step. If it's not there, there's no way it will appear in a budget. So it's a first important step. So getting those health advocates into those groups and advocating for money for healthcare is certainly important. So we need to be better at working and speaking across sectors, and that's something we're definitely trying, to do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karina. And you're right in terms, again, of having that multi-sectoral approach. I found it very, very fascinating that, the Ministry of the Environment recognized how a health-focused solution can be funded without wanting to get another department to do the work, and really getting that multi-sectoral adoption of the approach. I think, Ping, my question is going to be, since Karina mentioned blended finance, and many people are looking into, well, now with the declining development aid and assistance, what would the role of other investment bank and impact investment, can it come in, fill in this gap? Is that a realistic expectation? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do definitely think there's an opportunity for that. Now that there's a big shift in sort of philosophy of investing. Like I mentioned earlier, you no longer have to choose between making money and doing good. But although with that said, right now, the way financing works is that we are still pretty much in the silo. Venture capital is in one silo. Public funder in another silo, investment banker in another silo. I do think it's a time to sort of bring everyone together and really think about what blended finance or creative financing could look like, because right now we only think about what we could do and not collectively what we could do together. So until that happens, I think the real change or impactful change wouldn't necessarily happen.
Yeah, and I think there's another question I had, and I know you have a really great experience about, which is, you know, on the other side, since we're talking about young people as well, there are many young entrepreneurs and innovators in the sustainability space, but at the same time, they do face a lot of challenges. Women entrepreneurs as well, where that space where they can grow and innovate and lead their own small-scale businesses is pretty limited. So how have you seen that and addressed that from your experience?
Definitely. I do think underrepresentation of women is a very big problem within the innovation community. And because if you see right now, a lot of innovators are men, and what problem that would bring is it lacks the woman perspective into innovation. For example, if you are to innovating new financing scheme for underrepresented community, especially women, to get loans to start her own business. Traditionally, the innovator, the data that they have, the perspective that they have are very male-oriented. When it comes to women, especially in Southeast Asia, there's sort of that expectation where you have to take a time off of work to take care of your family or take care of your children, or sometimes the asset within the family is under your husband's name. So under that financial product design, it would automatically exclude women from being eligible to get those type of funding. The credit score of women would not be high. And that can be changed if we include women in the table, collect data from women. And research show that actually women has a better repayment rate compared to men when it comes to loans. Another fun example would be, we all love our wearable devices, right? You know, in early generation of those wearable devices, they only use data from men, and what it does is that it fails to account woman temperature change during her menstrual cycle, and it flags that she's either ill or the data is abnormal. Now, imagine that underrepresentation scale on to, you know, drugs discovery, human trial, and anything like that. It would create much bigger problem. So the big problem is that we don't have enough women in the innovation space, and what can we do about it? I believe that shifting the narrative, shifting the percentage would take a long time, but there is some quick win. And the reason that I say that it might take a long time because the underrepresentation problem is very structural, and a lot of time it's cultural, especially in Southeast Asia. And changing that takes a lot of time, whether, you know, trying to encourage more women in the STEM space, creating that safety net for women so that she can be more risk-taking and not having to worry about the family that she has to take care of. But what can we do right now? There are a few areas I can think about. Number one is that we have to make sure that the person who holds the money and makes the investment decision is as diverse as possible. Because right now, unfortunately, is majority men, right? And that brings two issues. We as human beings have biases. The number one bias that we have is that we tend to want to support the people who think like us, look like us, or, you know, conduct ourselves the way that we are, right? And if the money holder are men, they would automatically look for qualities that they think would be the quality of a successful business as a man, right? So they will look at aggression, they will look at speed of voice, or they'll look at certain traits that a lot of time women who are very capable don't exhibit the same traits just because they're women. That's number one. Number two is that people would overscore the unmet need that they have also experienced. So men living different paths from women experiences different unmet needs, different experience different problems. And when they see women who have experienced that, they tend to underscore the severity or, you know, the problem that people are facing. So by increasing people who makes the decision to include more, to have more diversity, we can sort of alleviate that problem. That's number one. Number two is that as we want more women in the innovation community, we have to make it easy and comfortable for women to be in it as well. The way that people go about and seek funding opportunity right now is in the networking event. And networking event is notoriously known for being very, finance bro sort of energy. You drink and you act loud and what have you, right? So what simple step that we can fix that is we have to be intentional about trying to build inclusivity in these opportunities, right? Instead of having networking event at 8 p.m. where women have to go home and take care of what the society is expected of them, move it a bit further, maybe alcohol-free and things like that. So I do think there are things that can be done. Not all hope is lost, but we, as people, have to be aware of our unconscious bias and think of how can we make the ecosystem more inclusive of everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ping. And that also reflects in the climate decision-making spaces as well, right? When we always see in the global spaces that there are far less, gender diversity in decision-making at the national level as well. Policies then do not include SRHR, respond to the needs. They're not gender responsive. They're not child responsive. But thank you for that insight. And now over to you. If you have any questions you'd like to ask our panelists, any comments you have, if you agree, disagree. I know it's the last session of the day. Yes, please.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jenny Asman. I'm from UNICEF. And firstly, this has been the most fantastic panel. You've got a hard slot in the afternoon on the last day, but this was both incredibly equity focused, but also really practical. So I've got a lot of takeaways. I have one very specific question, which was, Christine, when you were mentioning the multi-sectoral approach, raising attention to health, in both nationally determined contributions and in budgets. I would be really interested in your view on if you see a pathway between getting health in a nationally determined contribution and then going into the budget, or if it's really parallel processes to advocate for financing.
Please do, please.
Thank you so much for that question. And thank you for your positive feedback on our panel. That's really lovely to hear. Thank you. Again, my experience at the national level has largely been with Uganda. So it was a process, I would say, about 5 or 6 years, as long as we were sort of involved with some civil society organizations who were advocating for this in Uganda. So what they did was they worked with policymakers first to raise awareness of what the linkages are. The case of Uganda, there was I would say a little bit of fertile ground because of the demographic issues in the country, their very high fertility rate and the health issues, especially maternal and child health issues that came along with that, and the request of communities to have reproductive health services. So, and that need was very much expressed from the community. So that was certainly a great starting point. There was a lot of positive engagement with the policymakers and between policymakers and civil society. There was I would say, a process of a couple of years of capacity building on why this is important. It ended up getting in the news. And so there was media who took up this is happening. There's training on SRHR and climate. How are they linked? So that was very important. Very important learnings were taken away from that. And it was an important part in the process. What then finally happened, not even in this NDC 3.0, but even the previous one, their NDC 2.0, they called it, that reflected reproductive health programs there was a list of priority adaptation targets, and reproductive health programs fell under that. Now, to date, that hasn't ended with a budget for rolling that out, for implementing that at the national level. What it did lead to was those folks who were working together to get reproductive health into the NDC, they then got themselves on the group working and supported by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ugandan government to develop a health national adaptation plan. And I believe the next step will be to get that health national adaptation plan costed. And that's where they will be fighting for a budget for reproductive health. And again, having our program in Uganda and proving this return on investment on investing in reproductive health is again helpful advocacy tool for that. But I'd be happy to, if you're interested in being kept up to date in the case of Uganda, in so many countries at COP conferences, we try and use our position as an international NGO to convene different countries. So 2 years ago in COP in Baku, there was the colleagues from Zambia who said, oh my God, we're supposed to be leaving tomorrow, but actually we want to go to the Uganda Pavilion event. We want to learn what they did because we don't want to start from zero. And the Ugandan colleague said, that's not a problem. We'll just give you our documents. You pick up whatever is useful to you. You don't have to start from zero. Learn from what we did. So there is that sort of collaboration, that South-South collaboration that's so important, that sharing of information and experiences. But I would be happy to keep you posted on as and when that results in a decent budget.
And just to add to that, I've seen it with a few countries where once they had an NDC or a national adaptation plan, that would then help them apply for grants from the Green Climate Fund or other donors, because then they have a commitment and they want to, and normally in some countries actually cost the plan, so you know how much they need, and then they use it for international donor applications, but they can also use it internally with the Minister of Finance or the Prime Minister office to then translate a dedicated budget line or to appoint a focal point that would then get the funding to implement the plan. It's also a really good accountability mechanism, just because this country who develops an NDC, they have to report to the UNFCCC every 3 to 5 years about their progress. So it kind of pushes them a little bit. Similarly, Yukiko was talking about the Global Goal on Adaptation, and that's basically a mechanism that the UNFCCC, the Climate UN Agency, put so that countries then report on their progress of the plans that they put themselves. So again, if SRHR, if children responsive policies are put into these plans, then there's sort of a commitment. And then they would actually, at the national level, countries would look at their national development partners. So they would look at WHO, at UNICEF, in the country office to help them design programs that would then help them reach that target that they sort of committed to. So it is such a beautiful domino effect. Takes time. Countries do get the challenge of getting the funding that they need, but they do. Some countries, even the most climate vulnerable, dedicate the funding if the plan is put into place. So I hope that was. Any more questions, comments? We have a little bit of time, so we're really happy to hear even your experiences. And if not, nothing here, there. Okay. So before we end the session, I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to give one sentence of, one takeaway you want to give all the participants before we let them go and enjoy the rest of their day. So I'll start with you, Ping.
Yeah, I think everything comes down to inclusivity and diversity at the decision-making table, not just at innovation scene, but at policy-making level, at corporate level, at board level, and that is ever more important in the past than it is today.
Thank you. I'll come back to the theme of equity of this conference. I think often, not just in these conferences, but in climate spaces, in conservation spaces, it's easy to forget about what the faces look like, and climate change is certainly the face of a woman or a girl or of a child. And these are the people really impacted. And often policymakers they don't have that in mind when they are negotiating. It's so easy to forget that because of election cycles, because of funding pressures. But as we now recalibrate and reconstruct an international global aid in a new way, given the violent shocks that have happened, hopefully we can focus a bit more on equity, and we can be a little bit more intentional about putting the last first, because there are not just high net worth individuals, but there's a huge transfer of wealth that is happening in this generation, and people care. So we, again, as I said before, we need to be better at speaking across sectors, because people do care, people do have compassion, and hopefully that compassion will actually get to the people who need it most. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karina. Over to you, Kiko.
So I think I'll build on what Karina said, to give the name and face of those who are suffering most at the front line. I think first we have to ask them what they are really saying and how they feel, what kind of solutions they are proposing. Then, given this polycrisis nature, this multi-sectoral approach is totally needed, because we've been working in a siloed, duplicated work. So I think this multi-sectoral approach, and then putting those most vulnerable far left behind at the center of the solution. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I just borrow from what you are saying, because I think I learned a lot also from this kind of getting out of the silo thinking. But I think there's so many layers, right? So in academia itself, so say my discipline is demography, I work on meritocracy, so we start collaborating, but it's hard, because what you get evaluated probably is what you do in your own discipline. So that's one side. Then go across, talk to policymakers, practitioners. So there's an effort. So I think we just keep to insist on doing it to address these challenges. But I thank the conference for that, to sort of open our eyes as well. And now we know each other. We probably know who to talk to contact. And I think it's just thank the organizer also for this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Please help me clap for our incredible. And also we wanted you all to, have the chance to meet each other, to also speak with the panelists, to know more. But it's just we're so grateful to you for your time, for coming to listen to these incredible insights. And as we can see, the most common and most important things that we need to consider is really thinking about equity, being intentional about the communities, about the demographics, the young generations, and really including and centering and leading and providing leadership to those who are most affected by climate change. So thank you all so much.